right, Taras, man, thank you again so much for joining us. Now, you're the founder of Tarform, which is easily the most recognizable and badass EV motorcycle brands on the market. And they're made right here in Brooklyn, which is epic. And I know you've got such an interesting story as well. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Tarform for people that don't know it.
Electric motorcycles made in Brooklyn. Started about 7 years ago. I always wanted to be in transportation design in one way or another. Never really into motorcycles. My mom said, because motorcycles always had this, rebellious, dangerous aspect to them. And growing up in a culture like Sweden, where everything's about safety, like if you ride a motorcycle, you're on the fringe, right? It was not a common thing to do. And then my friend bought a Kawasaki when he was like 20, and shows up outside my home at that point, and I'm like, man, you bought a motorcycle? Why? Like, it just made no sense, you know. And then I started getting familiar with the thing. He used to take it where we went. I'm like, let me try it.
Yeah.
And I get on it, and I still remember that first experience of freedom and danger, and you're in full control of this thing, you know. And that was kind of my hook. I'm like, ooh, something about this thing.
Yeah.
15 years later, I'm like, maybe I'll start building them instead, and not just, build an electric motorcycle, but how do we build a sort of a new motorcycle brand that kind of captures the spirit of iconic British bikes, primarily cafe racers, but with a modern touch.
That's awesome.
So at that point, I was already in design, and I was doing furniture and different things, but not motorcycles. So this kind of had an appeal, like, what if can I put my own sort of styling on this motorcycle? Where do I even start, And then just went down a rabbit hole of how do you paint a tank? How do you create a custom fender? As a designer, I'm like, this is interesting. And it just opened up a whole new world of like how deep you can go.
Yeah. Did you love that hands-on approach as well to it?
I did, yeah. Initially it was intimidating because like I didn't know anything about internal combustion engines. It was intimidating yet approachable in a way. Just spending a lot of hours on YouTube and taking things apart, putting them back together. And I remember that first sense of like gratification when I took that motorcycle apart, put it back together, and it started.
Yeah.
I even have a video of it. I'm like, I can't believe it's running. Yeah. Future career motorcycle mechanic. This is like 15 years ago.
That's awesome.
And and then I moved to New York about 13 years ago. I was trying to build my design agency here. We stayed in Brooklyn in Park Slope, and I remember walking past this big warehouse and tons of motorcycles. I kind of walk in, I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And the owner, Justin, comes out, is like, oh, yeah, man, this is a community space. If you have your own bike, you can work on it. We got stands and lifts and tools and so on. And pretty much spend every weekend and every weeknight at this shop.
Wow.
Surrounded by people from all walks of life. They taught me everything: how to weld, how to fabricate seats, how to bend sheet metal, composites, and I was just fully immersed in this culture, which I didn't have in Sweden.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you really started here as a part of the community before anything?
Yes.
Wow.
But at that point, nowhere on my roadmap did I think that, like, this is what I'm going to do for a living. It was always a hobby. And then slowly I sort of started building custom bikes. And then one of my clients, Belstaff, a British fashion company.
Yeah.
I'm talking to the marketing executive, and there's a photo of an old Triumph on his in his office. And we started talking about motorcycles and so on. He's like, we're opening up a new Belstaff store in LA, and we need a vintage motorbike. Do you think you can find us one? Because I told him, like, I do this thing on the side. He's like, yeah, why don't I build you a custom bike, And he's like, you do that? I'm like, yeah, of course. So I get 30 days to build a custom, motorbike. I've never done that before. Then they started ordering more and more of these bikes.
The same company?
The same company.
Oh, wow, yeah. Is this just to sit as just a window piece kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly, decorative. So they started commissioning these bikes, and I started building them for their store in Munich, Tokyo, Milan.
That's epic.
And it became kind of like a side hustle.
Yeah.
So again, daytime, I'm working on my digital career, clients, mobile apps, branding. And then weekends I go and build these, 50-year-old bikes.
Yeah.
So I did that for like a good 3 to 4 years or something. And then at that point, the question was like, do I want to dive deeper into the custom motorcycle space? Do I want to become a custom motorcycle builder and just build one bike, and it's a tough gig. You're spending most of your time in the garage. So I wasn't fully committed to do that. And I didn't want to leave technology because I loved tech, everything that was happening in sort of product development at that point, sensor technology. So I had one foot in sort of what the future is and then one foot in the past.
Yeah.
And then naturally the question came, well, can I do both? And what would that look like? Like I love vintage, I love craftsmanship, but also technology, and at that point I was in my shop working on my Triumph, and then like why aren't there any beautiful electric motorcycles out there? There was a handful of companies that did electric bikes, but they were very sort of utility focused. There was no sense of design or aesthetics, and also there was a lot of talk in the motorcycle community, like where are electric motorcycles? This is about 2016. So
this is before Harley sort of jumped on.
Yeah, I think they just launched their first electric concept. But electric cars were on the upswing. Yeah. So Tesla was like, everyone was talking about Tesla, right? So you felt sort of the energy that, okay, electrical vehicles is going to be the next big thing. Mm-hmm. But what's happening in the two-wheel space? Yeah. That seems to be lagging. There were a few companies that did electric scooters, but when it came to performance motorcycles, really nothing inspiring. And then it was almost like I could see the whole thing. I'm like, oh, well, here's an amazing opportunity. Awesome. Yeah. Like build a new a new motorcycle brand, revive the classic sort of aesthetics of mid-century motorcycles, 1960s, 70s, when everything was about just simplicity and reducing things to sort of bare essentials, bring back high quality materials, exposed aluminum and leathers and so on, but also add cutting edge technology. So making it electric was an obvious thing. It's like, well, we're not going to build a motorcycle and put an internal combustion engine in 2016, right? So that was kind of like the initial inception, and from then on, the real work began.
Yeah, right. And so how long were you working on two things at the same time?
Maybe a year. So I started companies previously. It wasn't a new thing for me to like start a new company, but starting a motorcycle brand, that requires kind of a different type of resources. So I knew that we need to raise capital. I knew how to build a motorcycle, but I didn't know anything about electrical engineering. For many months, I was just sort of mapping out and educating myself. Well, what does the landscape look like? And very early on, I knew what the design should look like and sort of the feel of the bike, So that was easy. The challenging part is like, okay, well, how do we go from a design to a functional prototype? And the idea was just go step by step, even though the sort of big vision was there from the beginning. It wasn't just about building a prototype. It was building a completely new sort of mobility brand. But, the part of this whole thing is breaking it down to digestible chunks and not like, oh my God, how are we going to bring a motorcycle to market? I wasn't even thinking about it. I was just thinking, let's
get the wheel
build
to spin first.
That's it.
Yeah.
Literally, every day. And then after about 6 months, so I created a pitch deck and started talking to some of my previous investors and kind of getting a feel like, what do you guys think? Initially, people were like, no, this is crazy. You're going to need so much funding. And are you going to compete with Harley Davidson and Honda? Like, obviously, all of the big guys are going to start building electric motorcycles. You have a woodworking garage and a couple of tools. Like, that's what you're going to do, But I'm like, no, I'm committed. I know exactly. And so I put in whatever capital I had saved and started building the first frame. I hired a guy out of an engineering school, and it was me and 3 guys basically coming into this maker space, just starting, And at that point, I'm like, I can't do this on the side. It came to a point where I had to choose, like, do I take a leap of faith? And even though at that point, I think we needed 150,000 to get to the first milestone, which is sort of like the first semi-functional prototype. And we got 50,000, nowhere close to getting to the finish line. But it didn't matter, you know. I'm like, I'll use this and we'll figure it out. So we had to sort of take it milestone by milestone. And once people started seeing that we're actually committed to this, like things are happening, then they're like, oh, I think maybe this is going to work out. So I want to be part of it, you know. Awesome. So we started raising smaller angel checks, you know, 25,000 here and there. And it just created momentum. Yeah. You know, both for my own personal sort of motivation that is like, yeah, this is going to go. And just kept on rowing for about 18 months from sort of napkin sketch until we launched first to fully functioning prototype. Yeah.
And so every dollar that came in was just going towards just getting to the next step to be able to show more people what we can do to get more money.
Yeah.
And it's just a cycle like that for
just building momentum.
Yeah. How important was it to have like a finished renders or imagery of a finished product to take to investors?
I think it was everything. Otherwise, you know, they couldn't picture. If I just said an electric motorcycle, like, what does that mean? So the renderings definitely got them like, okay, this is cool. I can see this working, you know. But it wasn't just the renderings. For me, it was equally interesting / important to make the brand around it and really identify, like, what do we stand for? How do we design something that lasts? The idea was like, well, can we bring some of that into a modern product? And what would that look like? So I knew that the brand ethos was not just create a disposable sort of technological product, but how do we find that balance between longevity and technology? If we set out to build, you know, a high quality sort of collectible, iconic machine that I hope it's going to become in 20, 30 years, how do we also add latest technology into that and not make it feel outdated in 2 or 3 years, you know? So that was a big part of sort of the brand exploration. So telling that story besides the design, for a lot of people, they're like, yeah, we can see this working.
So it wasn't you just decided to, in your life, just decided to make a bike and then make a bike company. It was an entire first half of your life of knowledge and of every other industry that you've been working in, everything you had been doing accumulated into, you know, this point.
Absolutely.
So that's really good to know. It's not like just an idea and then you go just sort of learn every single thing about business. It was, you'd run businesses in the past.
It was exactly that. And the sort of the core of it was really a question that I asked myself, what do I want to do for a very long time forward? And the companies I had previously, they were usually driven by sort of opportunity. And I'm like, oh, let me build this company, sell it, and then I'll do what I really love, you know. And what I noticed is after a year or two, motivation kind of receded, you know, especially during hardships. When you run out of capital and there's not enough purpose to make you move forward, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, you know. But with Tarform, it was really sort of like, what's the core? What is it that makes me want to go up in the morning and do this for the next 10, 20 years? And it was literally for me mapping out, what am I good at? What is it that I'm truly passionate over that seems to have like sustained passion, you know? And it was motorcycles, it was design. Then the second element was, how do we build something that really lasts for a long time, you know? And again, we're going back to how do you build an iconic brand and the product, you know? And for me, that was always an interesting exploration. Like, what is it that makes something a classic product? What defines timelessness? So more from a design perspective, kind of like an exploration into art, you know, and how do you bridge art and technology? And then the third aspect was sustainability. It's like, this is what I'm good at and this is what the world needs. And how do I get that? How do I fulfill that sense of purpose? So not just building one bike at a time, but how do we do this at scale that has a possibility to make a dent? And, you know, looking at that point, I wasn't really aware of carbon emissions or sort of the destructive nature of the automotive industry in general and how much waste it's there from materials, toxic paints and primers. That came sort of later on as we started, you know, developing the product, and we sort of doubled down. We're like, well, it's not just a nice thing to be sustainable.
Yeah,
Like,
it's not
we
nice
need
to-
to rethink this.
yeah. That's crazy. Just the amount of research that you've done into just what's worked in the past, what's coming up, what does the world need, what do individuals want. It's incredible, the amount that's gone into it. So for everyone listening that's either working their 9 to 5 or working another job that they don't necessarily want to be doing, it's not their passion, and they do have an idea of what they want to be doing, what they love. What led you to the decision to create Tarform over all the other work that you're doing?
I guess already at an early age, I kind of knew that I did not want to do a standard 9 to 5. So my dad was an entrepreneur, so I think it came from my upbringing. The notion that you can go and create whatever you want, So I think that's kind of the baseline. To what degree? Well, that comes after failure. So after 4 or 5 failed businesses, I sort of trained myself that this is not just a failure; it's a lesson, And how do I learn from and do a honest assessment? Like, why did this thing fail? Was the product bad? Was the idea bad? Was the execution bad? Bad team? Not enough funding? Ultimately, it's usually a lack of motivation, because if your motivation drains, you will find reasons why it failed. And that's typically, why most startups go out of business. So I had kind of like a mindset platform, and every challenge I took on, I wanted to make it bigger and bigger. And Tarform was like the ultimate challenge. Like it was so big, I didn't even know how to approach it, and that excited me. It didn't scare me, but sort of jumping into this like unknown and figuring it out was a big part of the motivation. But that coupled with the sense of purpose. It was like, I really believe in where this needs to go in terms of sustainable transportation. But not just that, also, riding a motorcycle is one of the most powerful human experiences, right? Wherever you go, like I arrive on the bike and I'm exhilarated.
Yeah.
And I feel in general, everything today, we're sort of optimizing our society for comfort, where you're losing the human spirit, and nothing makes you sort of get a reminder when you're riding a motorcycle. So part of it was like, can we get people to re-experience that? And sometimes we use in our communication is, reawaken your senses. That on a motorcycle, all your senses are on overdrive.
And what do you love about what you do at Tarform that's going to make you want to do it for the next 10 years?
It's not one thing. It is the belief that we need to move towards more sustainable modes of transportation. And how do we do it? By inspiring people. So the leading aspect is just beauty and design. How do we make the most beautiful things?
Yeah.
The same reaction that you had is looking at it like, what the hell? Just feeling that sense of awe and wonder. That gives me personally the most pleasure. How do we do that and minimize the harm to the environment? Great. In that process, try to enjoy it. Even though no matter how hard it is. And we're 7 years in. It's been quite an up and down journey. And it still is.
I bet. What were the biggest challenges outside of the engineering? What was the hardest part of starting Tarform?
Starting it was pretty easy, and looking back, I thought that building the prototype was difficult, but it wasn't. Because building the prototype, it was sort of within my wheelhouse. I had a pretty clear roadmap of what we had to do, right? But after that, no idea about supply chain, no idea about regulatory approvals we need to go through of putting a vehicle on the road, safety standards. And we've pretty much been in fundraising mode ever since. That's 50% is building the bike in the company. The other 50% is raising capital to keep fueling this thing. So it took us about 2 years to go from a prototype to our first pre-production bike. And then it took us another year to go from our pre-production prototype to the first bike that we delivered in 2022. There's one thing to build something one-off, and you can spend an entire week on polishing one part to make it look good. But when you need to make that part times 10 or times 20, you really need to figure out the systems and the processes behind it. So it was less about building the bike. It was more about how do we build the machine that's ultimately going to be building the machine. How do we set inventory in place? Boring stuff like naming conventions on parts, different revisions. As you scale, you need to make sure that the part you design went into a specific vehicle.
Like you had the idea or the understanding of scaling a business ahead of that. So you didn't get to that stage and sort of make all those mistakes of just thinking it's one and done kind of thing. You actually had it in your mind, like, how are we going to scale and create processes, right?
I had an idea of it, but also I knew the importance of having the right advisors and team.
Okay.
And at that point, the brand sort of had enough momentum, so people kind of knew what we were doing and like, what is this company out of Brooklyn? They're building this electric motorcycle. We got a good amount of press and features, so I started reaching out to people, leaders in the automotive industry, and basically like, hey, can we get on a call? A few of them I offered advisory because they also felt that momentum is changing, like something needs to happen in the motorcycle industry. And here's this new company that built this new motorbike. Where do they come from? So a lot of these big companies were excited to be part of us or part of Tarform's evolution. And they contributed with making some parts for us. We did a couple of case studies, so they would get some PR value as well, while we were getting free sort of engineering or parts and so on. So it became a good way for us to keep momentum without spending a lot of capital. And some relationships started forming, and it was essential to really like ask like, well, how do you go and build a manufacturing company? What are the mistakes you should avoid? And
so more than anything, you knew how to ask the right questions.
I think that's the key thing. Yeah. From what I've seen, a lot of entrepreneurs do is they're very proud, and there's a lot of ego involved, and they think they have all the answers. And just asking one question can change the direction of everything. And I think it's a worthwhile process to like constantly re-examine your beliefs and like, is what I believe is true, or is it not true? And if it's not true, get rid of it. Don't be attached to. You can have an idea, you can have a vision, but how do you know it's the right thing to do? And it's such a simple process, but so many people don't do it.
So when you think like it has to be this way, you got to think, does it?
Like, does it?
Yeah,
exactly. Is this true? Is a good question.
Yeah. Now, do you have any advice for engineers, designers, or just creatives in general that are trying to develop something unique?
At the end of the day, it's just do it, make mistakes, and you'll figure it out. If I were to give myself advice a couple of years ago, it would be to maybe broaden the understanding of what, how do you make parts? Meaning, how do you go from a prototype to production? Most creatives are very interested in the creative process, right? Let's just make this thing. Let's make sure it looks great, it's beautiful, and so on. And then that's where the inspiration ends. But usually that's when real work begins, after you've built the product. What happens after? How do I sell this? How do I build a company around it? Creating spreadsheets, business models. For most creators, it's the boring stuff, and it was for me as well. I believe everything is a lesson. If there is some wisdom to draw upon every mistake, and not sort of regret it.
Now, Tarform created a ton of excitement pre-launch before there was even a bike to be bought. What was the strategy involved in hyping something that no one could actually buy?
Really no strategy. It was just, let's build this thing, let's tease some photos here and there and see if people get excited. We didn't get featured anywhere while we were building the prototype.
Okay, yeah.
Our Instagram was, I don't know, 1,000 followers or something like that. But then we set a launch date, and October 18, I think, 2019. And we sent out some invites, our newsletter, and 3 days before launch, we're just in the shop, like no sleep, and literally the paint is still wet on the bikes. And there's like 300 people at the launch event. You know, the Swedish news is there, like pushing a camera,
Yep.
and I'm like delirious. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, so tell us, you've been working on this electric motorcycle you're gonna unveil today. What is this thing? I'm like, yeah, well, you'll see. TechCrunch is there doing an interview. I'm like, how did you guys know about this, and why are you
How
here?
did they know?
I don't know. I guess like the word spread, you know.
Wow.
And I do my presentation, and we're like, yeah, here's a motorcycle made out of pineapples, and like we used all the sustainable materials, you know. And then we unveil the thing, and the whole crowd forms around the bikes. You know. From then on, it sort of started, you know, naturally kind of growing.
So all organic. So no like real paid PR.
No.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, 0 paid.
On talking about like people, you know, people of high profile that you've worked with or that own them, who are some of the biggest names that have Tarforms?
I don't know if I can disclose the ones that want to remain private.
Oh, really? Yep.
I guess.
Yep.
But some of them that have posted, Diplo has one of our earliest bikes. We hand delivered it to him in Malibu.
And he was, again, organic, just reached out to you?
Yeah, I think on Instagram, like, hey, how do I buy a bike?
Unreal.
Head of design of Nike has one of our bikes. An athlete who won the Super Bowl last year. So cool people that are like, how do I get a bike? You know, we did a shoot with Lewis Hamilton, so that was a fun experience. That became the cover for a Wall Street Journal.
That's unreal.
So we spent a whole day. The bike, we use plant-based materials, you know, and Lewis is plant-based, so they're like, cool, this is a perfect union of you know, machine, man and machine.
That's so cool. So, and I also know that the creative director of Squarespace has one. I think he was one of the first one.
Bike number 3, I think.
Really?
Yeah. The first 10 bikes I did all hand delivery. So basically just driving a pickup truck all over the United States and showing up outside people's doors and like, ta-da, your bike is here, here's your key. People are like, what the hell?
What do you think that means to people, that the founder actually shows up and hands over the keys?
I don't think they expected that. Yeah. But for me, it was like delivering a child.
Yeah.
Like, you know, after years of working on this thing, I just felt like I have to. Like, here it is. And the first couple of bikes was so strange. I'm like, so I guess it's yours? Like, it's not going to be at our garage anymore?
Yeah.
Because, like, you put...
Like, I guess
so
you can
much,
have it now that you pay.
Literally, you know, and... it was scary. Now it's just excitement. Like every bike we're on, I'm like, I can't believe it. Like
that's awesome. Was there any, even though it's all been organic, has there been any time influencer, celebrity, high profile individual has posted something that's actually really create some more hype that led to sales?
I don't think it was a specific post. I think it was one of our posts, which was pretty wild. We just a 15-second clip that I shot with my iPhone. That thing explodes. Wow. We go from 11,000 followers to 120,000 followers in 2 weeks because of that clip. Wow. Like I think now it has 15 million views or something. And I'm like, what? Just a basic 15-second trailer, you know? But that's the thing, you never know, right?
Now, what's the most unexpected lesson you've learned since starting Tarform?
There's a lot of them. Most unexpected. How quickly things can change, you know? Yeah. In terms of just like global dynamics and how fast you need to sort of rethink your roadmap. And I think a big lesson is also when you think you're out of options, when it's like really, wow, there's nowhere I can go after this. There's still at least a handful of options to entertain. And the more difficult the challenge, the more struggle, it just serves like a new energy where you, at least I get more motivated. Yeah. I'm like, oof, if we solved that before, surely we can solve this. Yeah. You know, and there's no shortcut to it. You can get all the advice in the world. You can read all the, you know, how-tos and to-dos. But when you're in that moment, it's like, I quit. There's nothing I can do. Or is there? You know, what else can I do? Yeah. And then you do it, and then it just builds so much. And,
that's awesome. That's really inspiring. Yeah. No, a lot of people need to hear that. What keeps you inspired and motivated to keep sort of pushing boundaries?
In the simplest way is just keep doing things that make you feel excited. You know, and sometimes, for sure, it's difficult, but also a big part of it is people's reactions. You know, every time we do test rides, every time I ride the bike, and you know, when people stop me in the street, like, what the hell is that? Just that look of sort of like suspended disbelief. You know, that gives me more energy. I'm like, okay, we're on the right track.
Yeah. Did this start from you wanting to create something for you?
Yeah. And
like, what would get me excited if
100%. Yeah. Which is, if you were to ask any like successful founder, entrepreneur, they're like, the last thing you should do is start a company around yourself or build a product around yourself, because, you know, it's such a, you don't know what people really want. But I was aware of that. So it was about, yes, I have a clear sense of direction and vision of how I want this. And this would be a motorcycle I would want to ride. But also creating space for external feedback and validation.
That's where it becomes a business. That's when it becomes you're actually selling to people instead of just making a dream bike for yourself. But knowing that your own taste from the beginning was so sort of correct, you know, I think that's incredible. All right, let's get into these rapid fire questions. The most inspiring place you've ever ridden?
Northern San Francisco, Mill Valley, and the Redwoods.
Yeah, okay. Now I know what you're
Those
talking about.
bends, amazing. And Sunset.
Yeah. What's your guilty pleasure?
Ice cream.
Yep. Okay. What's most exciting for you? Designing, building, or riding?
All of it, but probably in that sequence: designing, building, and riding.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's your go-to method for sparking creativity?
Being in nature, on top of mountains.
That's
you know,
awesome.
just isolated and observing leaves and trees and stars.
Awesome. What's one thing about business you wish you knew earlier?
That business is just as much about creating something of value as it is to turn it into business by selling it and generating revenue and paying people.
Yeah.
You know, it's those go very hand in hand. Otherwise, it's just an expensive hobby.
Yeah. All right. Favorite comfort food after a long ride?
Oh, pizza.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Nice.
Wood-fired pizza.
Hell yeah. One thing you regret spending money on?
I'd say privately, my early days on tuning cars.
Yep. Plural. Who would you love to see riding a Tarform?
Leonardo da Vinci in a Tarform would be interesting.
That's the photo you need.
You'd be like, what?
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, from helicopters to bikes. But a living person, Keanu Reeves, he's got his own motorcycle
Hell
company.
yeah, that's a great photo. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I think he would make sense.
Hell yeah. Have you ever, you don't know him personally at all?
I don't know him personally,
No?
but we went to his shop in LA a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
Spoke to his manager, but yeah.
If Tarform had a soundtrack, what genre or what artist would it be?
Well, the bike has a sound, you know, inspired by a lot of different soundscapes. Maybe Hans Zimmer,
Okay.
you know, a
Yeah.
little ominous, dark.
Nothing like that.
Yeah, it has those vibes.
I love that. Hell yeah. If you'd ride anywhere in the world tomorrow, where would it be?
Probably Ushuaia, Patagonia.
Okay. If you weren't building and designing bikes, what would you be doing?
Probably building houses, architecture.
Okay.
You know, that's maybe after Tarform. Or maybe it'll be a Tarform house. I don't know.
That's awesome.
I just love everything with big projects and just seeing them take shape, you know, which is literally the name of Tarform. It's in Swedish, taking shape.
All right.
Or Tarform, take form.
See, I thought it was just part of your name.
It's also part of my name.
Yeah.
So it goes together.
That's awesome. What's one secret talent or something that people don't know about you?
I grew up doing martial arts.
Okay.
So that was a big part of my life.
Yep.
Got a black belt and then stopped when I was 19.
Yep.
But I think it shaped a lot of my philosophy and sort of grind, you know, do things over and over and over again. Even if they're boring, just keep doing it. You know, so discipline.
That's awesome. All right. So now, I don't know if you saw this, but we usually get everyone to ask a question to the audience at the end. Is there something? It could be anything. It could be small, big question. What's something that you'd like you could get feedback on?
Yeah.
Even
Interesting. Yeah, I guess a broad question would be, what inspires you, or what makes you, what drives you? You know, what's the sense of purpose? If I don't know if a lot of people have articulated that to themselves.
I think about it sometimes, and I struggle. Like, and I think about it regularly. Like,
Yeah.
and it's hard, and it can kind of change
It's
as
not
well.
clear.
Like, yeah, Taras, that's everything that I wanted to go through. But I could literally sit here for another 1-2 hours and just keep talking about Tarform.
Thank you,
But
brother.
man,
It's fun.
thank you again so much for making this happen.
My pleasure.
Spending a couple of hours with us going through this, and you were actually super inspiring. Way more. I knew you were going to be awesome to speak to, but like how inspiring and how much thought has gone into every part of what you do is amazing. And man, thank you so
brother.
much, brother. I appreciate it.